The final bell rang across Jefferson High, echoing down hallways lined with half-torn posters and chatter about weekend plans. For most students, it was the sound of freedom. For Daniel Foster, it was the signal for order. A cue to pack his notebooks in the same sequence as always, math, history, English. He double-checked the zipper on his blue backpack twice, then stood by the door, waiting for the hallway to clear before stepping into the noise. Outside, the March air was cool, touched with the faint scent of melting snow. The Rockies loomed faintly in the west, their peaks still dusted white. Daniel pulled his hoodie tighter and began the familiar walk toward the bus stop, tracing the same sidewalk cracks he'd memorized since freshman year. Routine was safety. Routine was how he made sense of a world that often spoke too loudly and moved too fast. He didn't notice the small group of students tossing a football nearby, nor did he respond when one shouted his name. Daniel rarely did. He preferred quiet, numbers, patterns, schedules. His mind worked in rhythms few understood. That's what Ms. Pierce, his special education teacher, always said. Daniel sees the world in grids, while the rest of us see it in waves. Back home, his mother, Sarah, was setting out his favorite snack, apple slices in neat semicircles, expecting him at 3:45 as always. When the clock ticked past 4, she frowned but told herself he'd stopped by the library. He loved books about trains, and the Denver Public Library was only a short detour. Still, by 5, her unease deepened into something colder. The sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in bruised gold. The bus driver later told police Daniel hadn't boarded. A classmate thought she saw him near the corner of Birch and 12th, talking to someone in a dark jacket. Another swore he was alone. No one could say for sure. By 8, Sarah's voice trembled as she called her husband, Tom. He was still at work at the construction site downtown. He told her to check the park. When he rushed home an hour later, she was already there, flashlight shaking in her hand, calling her son's name again and again. In the distance, a siren wailed. Denver's night air turned sharp, the temperature dropping fast. The shadows stretched long over the empty streets. Neighbors began to emerge, drawn by the sound of fear in a mother's voice. Someone offered to help search. Someone else said to call the police. That night, the Fosters filed a missing person report. The officer who took it wrote "possible runaway" on the top line, as protocol often dictated for teens. But Sarah shook her head. He wouldn't run away, she whispered. He wouldn't break routine. And just like that, a quiet life in suburban Colorado cracked open. The last person who saw Daniel Foster after school that day would change how an entire community remembered 2003. If stories like this move you, subscribe now to follow every twist as we uncover the truth behind Daniel Foster's disappearance. Mornings in the Foster household began with quiet predictability. The smell of toast, the faint hum of the local news on TV, the sound of Daniel's pencil tapping in sets of 4 against the kitchen table. For Sarah, his mother, those rhythms were both comforting and fragile, like music that could stop at any moment. Daniel's world depended on predictability, each movement, each moment, arranged like a puzzle he could control. He woke every day at 6:15 a.m. Sharp, brushed his teeth for exactly 2 minutes, and double-checked his backpack before leaving for Jefferson High. His mother used to joke that he could have been a train conductor, so precise was his sense of time. "That's my boy," Tom would say, kissing Sarah's forehead before heading to work. Runs like clockwork. At school, Daniel preferred the back row, where he could focus without the constant shuffle of sneakers or whispers of classmates. His teachers admired his memory. He could recall full passages from his textbooks after a single reading. But his differences often drew confusion. When he avoided eye contact or failed to respond to jokes, some students mistook silence for arrogance. Others simply didn't notice him at all. Only Ms. Rachel Pierce noticed everything. She had been teaching special education in Denver for nearly 20 years and had a quiet patience most others lacked. "Daniel, your brain is like a map," she told him once, smiling as he rearranged colored tiles on her desk to form geometric patterns. "You see connections where we see clutter." He didn't respond then, but the corners of his mouth twitched, a silent thank you. Yet the world outside the classroom rarely adjusted to Daniel. The hallways at Jefferson were loud, fluorescent lights flickered unpredictably, and routines could collapse without warning. One morning in March, his locker jammed just before first period. For anyone else, a minor annoyance. For Daniel, it was chaos. The metal clang echoed in his mind, breaking his rhythm. A student nearby laughed, not cruelly, just amused, but Daniel froze, heat rising to his face. Ms. Pierce found him in the hallway minutes later, eyes fixed on the floor. "It's okay," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "Let's breathe, all right? In through the nose, out through the mouth." He followed her voice like a compass, grounding himself in her tone. By lunch, he was quiet again, but something in his eyes had changed, an unease that lingered. That evening at dinner, Sarah noticed he barely touched his food. "Tough day?" she asked gently. Daniel shrugged, tracing invisible shapes on the table. "It's fine," he said, but his voice was flat, detached. Tom reached over, resting a calloused hand on his son's shoulder. "You know, kiddo, some days just bend a little. Doesn't mean they break." Daniel nodded, but his mind was already elsewhere, on the stuck locker, the laughter, the feeling that order could vanish without warning. For someone who lived through patterns, even the smallest disruption could echo like thunder. And somewhere beneath that surface of quiet, something had already shifted, something no one in the Foster family yet understood. The morning of March 18th, 2003, began like any other. Grey light spilling through the blinds, the smell of pancakes in the kitchen, the sound of the radio softly playing old country tunes. Sarah smiled when Daniel appeared in the doorway, hair still damp from his precisely timed shower, wearing his favorite navy hoodie. "You've got that presentation today, right?" she asked. Daniel nodded once. "History of railroads," he said. "I'm ready." She watched him eat methodically, each bite identical, each movement deliberate. "You'll do great," she said. He glanced at her, eyes distant but calm. When the bus pulled up at 7:35, she handed him his lunch bag and a folded note that read, "Proud of you." He tucked it into his pocket without reading it. By all accounts, the day seemed ordinary. Teachers later described Daniel as quiet but focused, though Ms. Pierce remembered a flicker of distraction, a moment when he looked out the window longer than usual during class. "It's like he was listening to something far away," she said. After lunch, the substitute teacher in his English class called attendance twice. Daniel was there for the first roll call but gone by the second. No one noticed him leave. The bell rang at 3:05 p.m., and by 3:20 the usual crowd of students poured into the parking lot, laughter and engines filling the air. A few saw him walking alone toward the corner of Birch and 12th, his backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. "Hey, Danny!" a classmate shouted. "You need a ride?" Daniel didn't answer. He kept walking, steady and unhurried, toward the bus stop where he always waited. But that afternoon the bus came and went. He never boarded. At 4:15, Sarah glanced at the clock again, unease prickling at her neck. She tried to focus on folding laundry, convincing herself he was chatting with Ms. Pierce or browsing at the library. By 5 cow, she called the school. "So he probably caught a later bus," the secretary said kindly. "Don't worry, Mrs. Foster." But worry was already spreading through her chest like wildfire. By dusk, Tom's truck pulled into the driveway. The moment he saw Sarah's face, he knew something was wrong. "He's not home," she whispered. They drove through the neighborhood calling his name at every corner, headlights cutting through the growing dark. The smell of rain lingered in the air, though the clouds never broke. At 8:30 they reached the police station, Sarah clutching Daniel's photo, a yearbook picture with his unsure half-smile. The officer on duty took the report, jotting notes without looking up much. "He's 17, he said. "Sometimes kids just need space." Tom's voice hardened. "He's not like other kids. He wouldn't just go." The officer nodded politely but not convincingly. Paperwork shuffled. Procedures began. That night, as Sarah stood by the kitchen window staring into the quiet street, the ticking of the clock grew unbearable. The house, once filled with rhythm, felt hollow. Somewhere in Denver, her son had vanished between one moment and the next, into the thin line that divides routine from mystery. By dawn, the Fosters' front yard was lined with cars. Friends, neighbors, and volunteers gathered, their faces drawn with worry. The morning air carried that dry chill peculiar to Colorado Springs, thin, sharp, and restless. Sarah stood on the porch, clutching a mug of untouched coffee as Detective James Miller approached, notebook in hand. "Mrs. Foster," he said gently, "we're doing everything we can. We've got officers checking the school, bus routes, and nearby parks." She nodded but said nothing. Tom paced beside the driveway, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, scanning the street like he expected Daniel to appear any minute. "He walks the same way every day," Tom muttered. "Birch to 12th, then to the stop near Maplewood. He's predictable. Someone must have seen him." The first search team spread out that morning. Flyers went up on poles, grocery store boards, and the windows of coffee shops across Denver. Daniel's picture, soft-eyed, unsmiling, looked back from every surface. The caption read, "Missing since March 18, 2003. Please call if you've seen him." Local news picked up the story by afternoon. Reporters stood outside Jefferson High, cameras flashing as students filed out. A few kids whispered into microphones, repeating fragments of what they'd seen. "He was walking alone," one girl said. "I think he turned near the bus stop." Another boy mentioned a car, a dark sedan parked by the curb. Nobody could remember the license plate. At home, Sarah's phone rang constantly. Some calls offered prayers, others delivered cruel pranks that left her trembling. By the second day, the police organized a grid search. Volunteers combed through empty lots, wooded areas, and riverbanks. Dogs barked and pulled at their leashes, noses pressed to the cold ground. Helicopters traced slow circles overhead, their low hum haunting the silence that followed. Late that evening, Detective Miller returned. His voice carried the fatigue of long hours and few answers. "We found his backpack near the bus stop," he said quietly. "Everything inside looks untouched, books, pencils, lunch bag." Sarah's eyes widened. "That doesn't make sense," she whispered. "He never leaves his things behind." Tom leaned forward. Was there anything else?" "Not yet," the detective said, "but we're expanding the search perimeter tomorrow." "We'll find him." The words felt hollow, drifting between them like smoke. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat at Daniel's desk, fingers tracing the edges of his notebooks. Each page was meticulous, numbers aligned, handwriting steady. She found the note she'd slipped into his pocket, still folded neatly among his belongings in the evidence bag. "Proud of you." She pressed it to her chest, as though the words might guide him home. Outside, the porch light glowed against the dark, a beacon for a boy who never came back. Neighbors left candles and flowers at the gate. The wind rustled through them softly, as if carrying prayers across the sleeping city. And somewhere beyond those lights, the trail that began with Daniel's last step grew colder with every passing hour. The house on Birch Street had always been steady, quiet dinners, laughter in short bursts, and the hum of Daniel's routines anchoring each day. But after his disappearance, time inside that home lost meaning. Days blurred into nights, the clock ticking louder, crueler. Sarah stopped cooking, though she still set a plate for her son at the table each evening. Tom spent hours driving, retracing every road between the school and the bus stop, convinced he'd missed something. In the beginning, they spoke softly, clinging to hope. "He's out there," Tom would say, gripping her hand. "He just got turned around." "Someone will find him." Sarah nodded, but her eyes were hollow, her voice fragile. "He's scared of the dark," she whispered. "He doesn't like loud places. Where could he go?" Weeks passed, and Faith began to splinter. The police had no new leads, and the local news shifted its focus to other stories. The Fosters' phone barely rang now, except for Tom's late-night calls to the detective. "You can't give up," he'd say, his tone growing sharper each time. "He's my son. You don't stop looking." Detective Miller's voice remained calm, careful. "We haven't stopped, Mr. Foster, but we need something new to go on." Inside the house, silence thickened. Sarah spent most of her days in Daniel's room, sitting by the window, watching for a shape that never appeared. His books remained untouched, his favorite train models perfectly aligned on the shelf. Every object felt sacred, evidence of the boy she refused to let fade into memory. At night, she left his lamp on, whispering prayers into the quiet. Tom, meanwhile, grew restless. He took leave from work, spending his time printing maps, interviewing neighbors, even visiting shelters downtown. "Maybe he's there," he told Sarah one evening, voice tight. "Maybe he's lost and just doesn't know how to tell anyone." She looked up, eyes red. "Daniel doesn't forget where he belongs," she said. "He'd find his way home." The tension between them sharpened as days turned to months. Sarah blamed the police for giving up too soon. Tom blamed himself for not being there after school that day. "If I'd left work early," he said once, slamming his fist on the counter. "If I'd just—" She stopped him with a trembling voice. "Don't! You'll drive yourself crazy." By summer, their marriage existed in fragments, shared grief, separate pain. The dining room filled with unanswered mail and half-empty coffee cups. Sometimes, when the silence grew unbearable, Sarah would turn on Daniel's favorite song from childhood, hoping the melody might draw him back. On the first anniversary of his disappearance, they held a vigil at Jefferson High. Candles flickered in paper cups, their flames bending under the wind. Neighbors murmured prayers, teachers hugged Sarah, and Tom stood at the edge of the crowd, unable to speak. When the candles finally dimmed, the darkness seemed heavier than before. And as the last light went out, Sarah whispered into the night, "I'll keep it burning for you, Daniel. I'll never stop." By 2008, Birch Street looked different. The old maple tree outside the foster home had been cut down after a storm. The houses repainted, the neighbors replaced by new families who didn't know the story that once haunted the block. The world had quietly shifted, while the Fosters remained frozen in the same year. Daniel's disappearance had become a whisper, a story told in passing. "Remember that boy who went missing?" Before fading into casual silence. The police had long archived the file, labeling it unsolved, insufficient evidence. Detective Miller retired the following year. Sarah sent him a Christmas card anyway every December, each one signed the same way, still waiting. She no longer expected a reply. The town, however, had learned to move on. Jefferson High was renovated, the old wing where Daniel once studied replaced with glass and steel. Students walked through those halls unaware that a name still carved faintly into one locker, D. Foster, belonged to a boy who never made it home. Ms. Pierce still taught there, her hair grayer now, her smile slower to appear. Every March, she left a single sunflower on the steps outside the school. No one ever asked why. Tom tried to fill the silence with work. He built houses across Denver, hammering nails with a fury that only grief could sharpen. At night, he sometimes sat in his truck outside old neighborhoods, the engine off, headlights dim. He'd imagined Daniel at 17 forever, awkward, quiet, gentle. He'd be 22 now, he told Sarah one evening, probably in college studying trains or engineering. She smiled faintly. He'd still line up his pencils before starting anything, she said. They laughed for the first time in months, the sound strange but warm. But laughter never stayed long. Their marriage, already fragile, became a quiet truce. They lived together as companions bound by loss, not conversation. The house felt too large, the air too still. Sarah kept Daniel's room exactly the same, dusting the shelves each Sunday, washing the bed sheets every spring. "He deserves a clean room," she'd say whenever Tom suggested packing things away. He never pressed her. Some nights teenagers from the neighborhood would drive by the foster home, daring each other to stop and knock. "That's the haunted house," they'd whisper. Rumors spread online, stories about ghostly sightings, secret tunnels, even government cover-ups. None of it was true, but the myths kept Daniel's name alive in their own distorted way. One evening, Sarah found a note on the porch. No name, just a short message written in blue ink. "I remember him. He was kind." She held it for a long time before tucking it into her Bible. By 2010, the candle she used to light every March burned lower each year. the wax spilling down its sides like tears. Denver's skyline grew, new streets cut through old neighborhoods, and the world turned forward. But in one small home on Birch Street, time refused to move. The photo of Daniel on the mantel remained untouched, his half-smile still asking a question no one could answer. By 2017, the box labeled Foster, Daniel, Missing Person, 2003, sat untouched in the Denver Police Cold Case Archive, its edges yellowed with time. Detective Marcus Hale found it by accident, while searching for files on another case. He wasn't supposed to take it home, but something about the faded photograph clipped to the cover, a young boy with calm eyes and an uncertain smile, made him pause. He slipped the file under his arm and carried it to his desk. Hale had grown up in Denver, not far from Birch Street. He remembered the flyers from when he was a teenager, the news anchors repeating Daniel's name night after night. "That boy just vanished," his mother used to say, shaking her head. "No trace, no goodbye." The case had haunted his memory, tucked away like a song you can't forget. Now, years later, with 2 decades of detective work behind him, he felt an old curiosity return, this time mixed with something heavier: responsibility. He opened the box and began sorting through the contents: police reports, interview transcripts, search maps, even an old evidence bag containing a broken pencil. The handwriting on the reports varied, different officers, different decades, but one pattern stood out: inconsistency. The times didn't match. The last confirmed sighting listed Daniel near Birch and 12th at 3:15 p.m., but another report from a teacher stated she saw him inside the school at 3:25. 10 minutes might seem trivial, but to Hale, it was the kind of gap that cracks entire investigations. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. "How does a 17-year-old disappear between one corner and the next?" he muttered. His partner, Detective Ruiz, looked up from her desk. "Which ghost are you chasing now?" she asked. "The Foster boy," Hale said. Ruiz frowned. "That one's a graveyard case, you know that, right?" "I just want to see what they missed," he replied. That night, Hale stayed late at the precinct. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the empty office. He reread every statement, every timestamp, every vague recollection. Most witnesses were kids then, their memories now blurred by adulthood. Still, one name appeared again and again: Ms. Rachel Pierce, the teacher who knew Daniel best. He made a note in his journal: "Find her." Before leaving, Hale spread the photographs across his desk: the bus stop, the backpack, the vigil candles. Then he stopped at one, a picture of Daniel's classroom taken after the disappearance. On the chalkboard behind the empty desks, faint writing remained visible: "Be kind, be patient." He stared at the words until the office clock struck midnight. Something about the case felt unfinished, not just as a mystery but as a wound. Hale closed the file carefully, his decision already made. Tomorrow, he would start from the beginning. As he locked up and stepped into the cool Denver night, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky, each one a reminder that some stories refuse to fade. Daniel Foster's was one of them. The address wasn't hard to find. Rachel Pierce still lived in the same modest Denver neighborhood, where she'd settled after retiring from Jefferson High. When Detective Hale knocked on her door one gray February morning, she hesitated before opening it. Her eyes, soft and tired, flicked to the badge in his hand, and then back to his face. "It's been years," she said quietly. "No one's come about Daniel in a long time." Hale nodded. "That's why I'm here, Miss Pierce. I'm reviewing old cases, trying to close what's still open." She invited him in, motioning toward the couch. The living room smelled faintly of dust and lavender, filled with old books and framed class photos. One of them caught his attention: students in uniform rows, smiling for the camera. Daniel was there, standing off to the side, slightly apart from the others. "Tell me about him," Hale said. Rachel smiled faintly, her gaze distant. Daniel was different, yes, but not fragile. People misunderstood him. He just processed the world in ways that made sense to him, even if they didn't to others. He noticed patterns most of us missed. He could hear rhythm in things like footsteps, rainfall, Even the way doors closed. She paused, her voice tightening. That's what made him special. Hale flipped open his notebook. You were the last teacher to see him that day, right? Rachel hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. Yes, I thought he'd gone straight to the bus. That's what I told the police. He watched her closely. You thought? She looked up, eyes suddenly wet. I wasn't honest. Not entirely. The silence stretched between them. Hale waited, steady and patient. Rachel drew a slow breath. I saw him after school. He came by my classroom around 3:15, said he wanted to talk. He looked anxious. He said something about someone bothering him, but he wouldn't say who. I thought it was just kids teasing him again. I told him it would be all right, that he should head home. She covered her face with her hands. I didn't tell the police because I was afraid they'd think I hadn't done enough, and maybe I didn't. He left, and that was the last time I saw him. Hale's voice softened. Why come forward now? Rachel wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve. Because I saw a car that day too, parked near the east gate. Dark blue, older model. I didn't think much of it at the time, but when the report said he disappeared near Birch and 12th, I realized that was the same direction the car drove off. Hale wrote the details carefully. Do you remember anyone connected to that car? She hesitated again. There was a man who used to volunteer in our special education program. Kind face, always patient with the kids. I can't remember his name, but Daniel trusted him. He was there that week. Her voice broke into a whisper. Detective, I think Daniel knew him. Detective Hale stared at the file for hours after leaving Rachel Pierce's house. The detail about the volunteer gnawed at him, a kind-faced man who had worked closely with Daniel, someone trusted enough to be invisible. Hale returned to the precinct the next morning and requested access to the old evidence locker. The clerk looked at him skeptically. Those boxes haven't been touched in years, she said. You sure it's worth reopening? It's worth trying, Hale replied. Inside the evidence room, he found the sealed bag containing Daniel's backpack. Dust clung to the plastic, the label faded but legible. Hale signed the paperwork and sent it to the forensics lab for modern testing. Let's rerun it, he told the technician. Everything, fibers, prints, trace DNA. Use the new database cross-matching. Days turned into weeks. The case that had once felt like a whisper began stirring again through the department. Younger officers, who barely remembered 2003, asked quiet questions in the break room. You think they'll actually find something after all this time? One said. Maybe, another replied. Technology's different now. Meanwhile, Hale kept digging. He found an old volunteer logbook from Jefferson High, tucked in a dusty records box. Names and dates filled the pages, written in neat cursive. Most were teachers, parents, or local college students. But one signature appeared multiple times in March 2003, Michael Trent. The name didn't appear anywhere else in the report. Hale underlined it twice. He ran a background search. The system returned fragments, an address in Aurora, an expired driver's license, and a brief stint as a classroom assistant. Nothing criminal. Still, something about the gaps felt deliberate. People don't just vanish from paperwork unless they want to. Then, late one Thursday afternoon, the lab called. Hale answered before the second ring. Detective Hale, you'll want to see this in person, the technician said. In the sterile glow of the lab, she handed him the report. Partial DNA match from the backpack strap, she explained. It doesn't belong to the boy. It's male, mid-30s at the time, and it just pinged in CODIS this week. A minor arrest, trespassing 2015. Hale's eyes narrowed as he read the name. Michael Trent. His pulse quickened. You're sure? 100% match, she said. Old sample, but the technology's strong enough now. It's him. Hale stood still for a long moment, the hum of the machines filling the silence. 20 years of dust and silence had finally spoken, and the voice pointed directly at someone the police had never even questioned. That night, Hale sat alone in his car outside the precinct, the city lights reflecting off the windshield. He thought about Daniel's mother, who had waited all these years for an answer. For the first time, he had one, but it was only the beginning. He whispered to himself, All right, Trent, let's see where you've been hiding. And in that quiet moment, the long, cold trail began to burn again. By the time the sun rose over Denver that April morning, the story had already broken. Headlines flashed across local news sites. Arrest made in 2003 cold case, DNA links former volunteer to missing student. The name Michael Trent spread through the city like wildfire. For many, it was a name forgotten. For the Fosters, it was one they'd never heard at all. Detective Hale stood in the hallway of the Aurora apartment complex as officers prepared to enter. The air smelled faintly of rain and asphalt. Hale adjusted his jacket, heart steady but heavy. After 22 years, this wasn't triumph. It was gravity. "Let's do it," he said. The knock was firm. "Michael Trent, Denver Police Department, open the door." Inside, a shuffle, then silence. A few seconds later, the door cracked open, revealing a man in his 50s, unkempt, eyes dull, hair streaked with grey. "What's this about?" he asked. "You know what this is about," Hale replied. "Daniel Foster." For a moment, Trent's face twitched, barely a flinch, but Hale saw it. The arrest was calm, procedural. As officers led him out in cuffs, neighbors peered from behind curtains, murmuring. Denver hadn't seen this kind of story in years, one that reached into the bones of a city that had almost forgotten. By noon, every news outlet in Colorado had parked vans outside the precinct. Reporters fired questions into the air. Is it true DNA solved it? Did the suspect confess? What took so long? Hale ignored them all, his focus locked on the case file spread open before him. Inside the interview room, Trent sat still, wrists cuffed to the table. Hale entered quietly, a recorder in hand. "You worked at Jefferson High in 2003, he began, volunteered with the special education program. Trent's gaze drifted toward the ceiling. "I volunteered lots of places," he muttered. "Daniel Foster," Hale pressed. "You knew him." Trent exhaled slowly. He was a good kid. Smart. Quiet. His tone was flat, distant. Hale slid a photo across the table, the same yearbook picture from the original report. "His DNA was on this backpack," he said. "Yours was too. Want to tell me how that happened?" Trent's jaw tightened. He didn't speak. "You helped him every Tuesday," Hale continued. "You were one of the few people he trusted. So why does your name disappear from every record after March 18th? Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the soft hum of the air vent. Then Trent's voice dropped low. "You think you've got it all figured out," he said, almost to himself. "I think Daniel deserves the truth," Hale replied. When Hale left the room, the sky outside had darkened. The storm clouds rolled in over the Rockies, heavy and grey. In the briefing area, another officer handed Hale a statement draft for the press. He read it once, folded it, and said quietly, "Let them know the boy's name. That's the only one that matters." And across Colorado, people who once searched by candlelight whispered it again, Daniel Foster. Detective Hale had been in hundreds of interrogations, but this one felt different. The air inside the small interview room was dense, the clock ticking too loudly. Michael Trent sat across from him, wrists resting on the table, eyes fixed on a point somewhere past Hale's shoulder. There was no arrogance, no panic, just an unnerving calm. "You worked with kids, Michael," Hale began, his tone steady. "You volunteered for months. You built trust. Why, Daniel?" Trent didn't respond. His fingers tapped lightly against the table, a rhythm too deliberate to be nervous. Hale watched him closely. "You know, when we reopened this case, I looked through everything, every statement, every note. You were the ghost in all of it, helpful, polite, and completely invisible." A flicker crossed Trent's eyes. "You don't know anything," he muttered. "Then help me understand," Hale said, "because right now I've got your DNA on a 17-year-old's backpack and 22 years of silence between you and the truth." Trent leaned back in his chair. "You think I remember details from 2 decades ago? Kids come and go. Maybe he left it near my car. Maybe I picked it up." "You're chasing shadows, Detective." Hale opened the folder slowly, pulling out a photo of Daniel's classroom. You helped him pack up his art projects the week before he disappeared. Ms. Pierce said he trusted you more than most adults. That's not a shadow. That's a connection. Trent's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Hale leaned forward. You want to talk about connections? Fine. You were arrested in 2015 for trespassing at a community center. You told the responding officer you used to volunteer with special kids. You said their calm made you feel seen. That's in the report. The room fell silent. Trent's fingers stopped tapping. Hale saw it then, the smallest tremor in his expression, a crack in the stillness. Where is he? Hale asked quietly. Trent looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. You wouldn't understand, he said, voice low. Try me. Something dark flickered behind Trent's gaze. Some people don't belong in this world, he said. They don't fit. You see it, don't you? The way they move, the way they stare through you, they're different. Hale's throat tightened. You mean Daniel? Trent didn't answer. He smiled faintly, almost wistfully. He trusted me, that was his mistake. The words hung in the air like poison. Hale's jaw clenched, his hand curling into a fist beneath the table. He forced his voice to remain calm. We can do this the easy way, or the long way, he said. But either way, the truth's coming out. Trent leaned forward, his expression suddenly blank again. Then find it, he said. If you can. When Hale left the room, Ruiz was waiting in the hallway. Anything? She asked. He shook his head, his face grim. He's hiding behind his own lies. But he slipped. He knows something. Ruiz crossed her arms. So, what now? Hale looked back at the closed door. Now, he said, we make him talk. The news of Michael Trent's arrest spread fast, but for Sarah Foster, it arrived like a wave she couldn't brace against. When Detective Hale called, his voice steady and cautious, she barely heard the words. We've made an arrest, he said. There's new evidence connecting someone to Daniel's case. For a moment, her breath caught. 22 years of waiting had taught her not to hope, but hope, cruel and familiar, still found its way in. Does this mean you found him? She asked, voice trembling. Hale hesitated. Not yet, ma'am. But it's a step closer than we've ever been. After the call, Sarah sat alone in Daniel's room, the same way she had hundreds of nights before. The walls were lined with his old posters, trains, constellations, puzzles. His book still smelled faintly of paper and lemon cleaner. She picked up one, The Great Northern Railroad, its spine creased from years of use. Between the pages, she found a folded sheet of paper she'd never noticed before. It was covered in Daniel's neat handwriting, short sentences, almost like reminders to himself. If something changes, breathe. Count to 10, find order, find home. Her hand shook as she read the words aloud. They were instructions, his way of controlling the chaos he feared. And suddenly, she understood that he must have been terrified that last day, his structure broken, his world tilting out of rhythm. The thought cut through her chest. That evening, she drove to Jefferson High for the first time in years. The parking lot was empty, but the building looked the same. Brick walls, metal doors, the echo of memories clinging to every corner. She walked to the east gate, where Hale had said the car had been seen. The air was cold, the wind carrying faint traces of rain. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Daniel, I'm here." A soft calm settled over her, fragile but real. When she returned home, Tom was sitting at the kitchen table, the same old coffee mug between his hands. His face had aged, lines carved deep by years of silence. "He called me too," Tom said quietly. "They think it's him, the volunteer." Sarah nodded. "But we still don't have Daniel." Tom looked down. "No, we don't." For a long time, neither spoke. Then Sarah said, "Maybe it's not about finding him anymore. Maybe it's about understanding what he went through, how afraid he must have been, how brave." Tom met her eyes, tears forming. "You think he was brave?" "I know he was," she said. "He lived every day in a world that didn't always make sense to him, and still he smiled, still he trusted." They sat in silence, the ticking clock filling the space between them. Outside, the porch light flickered just once. Sarah glanced toward the window and whispered, "We'll bring you peace, Daniel." "I promise." For the first time in 2 decades, her words didn't feel like they were spoken into emptiness. They felt heard. The courthouse in downtown Denver was packed when the trial began. Reporters filled the benches, notebooks ready, cameras waiting outside. The words "State of Colorado versus Michael Trent" echoed through the hallways like the reopening of an old wound. For Sarah and Tom Foster, each day inside that courtroom was both hope and punishment. Hope that answers might finally surface. Punishment for having to hear their son's name spoken like evidence. Detective Hale sat near the front, hands clasped, eyes sharp. 22 years of silence had led to this room. The prosecutor began by outlining the DNA evidence, the volunteer logs, the inconsistencies in Trent's testimony. Every word felt heavy, deliberate. When Trent entered, dressed in a plain grey suit, the room fell quiet. He kept his eyes on the floor, his expression unreadable. Sarah felt her stomach twist. For years she had imagined a monster. Instead, he looked ordinary, forgettable, a man you'd pass on the street without a second glance. The prosecution called Hale to the stand. "Detective, what led you to reopen this case?" Hale's voice was steady. "A detail that didn't fit. Once I found the missing volunteer's name, the pieces started to move. And when DNA confirmed the connection, we knew we had to confront him." The defense attorney rose. "Detective, is there any physical evidence directly proving my client harmed Daniel Foster?" Hale didn't flinch. "No remains have been found, but every trail points to him, every opportunity, every inconsistency." The jury listened in silence. The case, though circumstantial, carried weight through persistence and truth. Still, uncertainty hung in the air like dust. Then came the moment that shifted everything. The prosecution called an unexpected witness, Ms. Rachel Pierce. The courtroom murmured as she took the stand, older now, voice trembling but clear. "Ms. Pierce," the prosecutor said, "did you ever notice anything unusual about the defendant when he volunteered at Jefferson High?" She nodded slowly. "He was patient, kind on the surface. But sometimes I'd catch him watching the students too closely, especially Daniel. I told myself it was harmless. I wanted to believe people were good." Her voice broke. "The day Daniel disappeared, he came to me scared. I told him to go home, and I saw that same car, the one the police mentioned. Michael Trent's car. I saw him near the east gate." Trent's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The jury watched him closely now, noting the stiffness in his posture, the twitch of his hand. When Sarah was called next, she held Daniel's photo. "All I want is to know the truth," she said. "If you know what happened, please say it." Trent said nothing. His silence filled the room louder than any confession could. As the session ended, rain began to fall outside, streaking the courthouse windows. Hale looked toward the Fosters, offering a nod, not victory but acknowledgement. The truth was emerging, slow and unstoppable, like a storm long delayed. The verdict came on a cold Friday morning. The courthouse was silent as the jury filed in, faces pale and unreadable. Sarah gripped Tom's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. Hale sat a few rows back, his heart steady but his stomach coiled with tension. The foreman stood, unfolding the paper that would decide 2 decades of waiting. "On the charge of second-degree murder," the foreman said, voice trembling slightly, "we find the defendant, Michael Trent, guilty." The air in the courtroom shifted. It wasn't applause, not even relief, just a long collective exhale. Sarah covered her face, tears spilling quietly. Tom wrapped an arm around her, eyes fixed on the man who had shattered their world. Trent showed no reaction. He simply stared ahead, lips pressed together, as if the verdict had been expected. Judge Avery's tone was firm as she spoke. "Mr. Trent, this court sentences you to 25 years to life in the Colorado State Penitentiary. The evidence may have been old, but justice, however delayed, remains justice." Hale felt the words settle deep in his chest. It wasn't closure, not yet, but it was something solid in a case built on dust and echoes. When he stepped outside, flashes from cameras erupted. Reporters shouted questions, but he didn't stop. He'd never liked the attention. What mattered wasn't the noise, it was the silence after, when truth finally filled the space it had once left empty. Later that evening, Sarah and Tom sat in the kitchen with 2 cups of untouched tea. The house was quiet, the same old clock ticking above the stove. "Do you feel better?" Tom asked softly. Sarah stared at the window, watching the faint glow of streetlights. "Better isn't the word," she said. "It doesn't bring him back, but maybe it means we can breathe again." Tom nodded. "He'd want that." She smiled faintly. "He'd say we're finally back on schedule." Across town, Detective Hale returned to his office one last time before retirement. The lights were dim, the city beyond the window painted in winter grey. On his desk he placed the case file, now stamped closed, but he didn't file it away. Instead, he opened the folder and looked once more at Daniel's photo. "You were the start of this," he murmured. "The reason I kept going." Ruiz entered quietly. "You staying late again?" she asked. "Just saying goodbye," he said. "To the case, to the kid." She smiled. "You think he knows?" Hale looked out the window at the lights flickering across Denver. "I hope so." He closed the file gently and locked his drawer. The sound of the key turning felt final, yet peaceful. Outside, snow began to fall. Soft, steady, like forgiveness. The city, restless and bright, moved forward. But in one small house on Birch Street, a candle still burned by the window, its flame unwavering. For the first time in 22 years, it didn't stand for waiting. It stood for remembrance. Spring returned to Denver slowly, the snow melting into narrow streams that traced the sidewalks along Birch Street. 2 years had passed since the trial, yet the memory of Daniel Foster lingered everywhere, in the quiet hum of the neighborhood, in the whispers of people who still paused by the old house with the porch light that never turned off. Sarah Foster stood in the gymnasium of Jefferson High, surrounded by teachers, students, and families. On the wall behind her hung a large mural, a train cutting through the Rockies, painted in soft blues and golds. Above it the words, "Be kind, be patient." Daniel's favorite line from his classroom chalkboard were written in bold letters. The school had named the project the Foster Foundation for Autism Awareness, funded through donations from across Colorado. It aimed to support students who, like Daniel, saw the world through different rhythms. As Sarah spoke at the dedication, her voice was calm but thick with emotion. "My son taught me that order can be love," she said. "That difference is not a flaw, but a language some of us must learn to hear. Today we listen." Tom stood beside her, holding her hand. Time had softened the lines of grief on his face, though the ache never truly left. "You did good, Sarah," he whispered. He'd be proud. After the ceremony, Detective Hale approached, now retired, but still sharp-eyed. He looked at the mural for a long moment before saying, "You know, he changed more lives than most people ever will." Sarah nodded. "He changed mine the most." Outside, the afternoon light stretched long and golden across the schoolyard. The same place that had once held silence and fear now carried laughter. Children ran across the field, their voices bright and free. For the first time in years, Sarah didn't feel the pull of what was missing, only the strength of what remained. Later that evening, she and Tom drove home in quiet companionship. The house looked smaller now, gentler somehow. When they reached the porch, Sarah paused by the familiar candle still burning in the window. "Do you think it's time to put it out?" Tom asked softly. She smiled faintly. "No," she said, "it's not for waiting anymore. It's for remembering." They stood together, the glow casting warmth over their faces. Across town, Hale sat on his balcony, watching the Denver skyline shimmer against the twilight. He opened his old notebook, now nearly empty, and wrote a single line. "Truth doesn't end when the case does. It lives where love refuses to die." Years later, the mural at Jefferson High became a tradition. Every spring, new students gathered to touch the painted train and leave a small token, a drawing, a note, a flower. And every March 18th, when the sun dipped behind the Rockies, the last light to fade from the mural was Daniel's name, written small but unshakable near the corner. It never dimmed completely. Neither did the love that carried it. If stories of courage, truth, and remembrance move you, subscribe now and keep following the voices that deserve to be heard. And don't forget to watch the next video. Another journey toward light and justice awaits.